Welcome to the WHN broadcast. I'm your host, Katie Marsh. Today, we will be discussing the new variant Arcturus, XBB.1.16, which is outcompeting other variants. Today, we have special guests, Sunil Raina, professor and head government Medical College, Tanda, Himachal Pradesh, India; Raj Rajnarayanan, professor, Biomedical Sciences, New York Institute of Technology at Arkansas State; and T. Ryan Gregory, professor, evolutionary biologist from the University of Guelph. All right, let's start with you, Ryan. So there is this new variant that has been raising a lot of concerns in the science and public communities. What is going on with the variant changes that we're seeing right now?
So we are seeing what I have said I think is the age of recombinants. So XBB.1.16 is a descendant of the original XBB, which is a hybrid variant or a recombinant between two members of what was members of the BA2 lineage within Omicron. And it has had a number of different descendants since then. So this new one, XBB.1.16, is a cousin of, or a sibling, perhaps you could say, of XBB.1.5, which is the currently dominant variant in most parts of the world. It has a couple of notable mutational changes, but it seems to be doing quite well in terms of growth advantage relative to other variants, and it's of particular interest because of where it's growing, namely in India, where they haven't had a wave for some time. So that's one of the main reasons that it's of interest as well.
Okay. So why are we so concerned about XBB.1.16, Ryan? Are symptoms different? Can you tell us?
There are reports of some different symptoms. So conjunctivitis, itchy eyes, especially in children, that seems to be showing up. There are quite a few reports of that. In India, for example, it's always of interest when things start to manifest differently during infection. There's also concern that if it is able to infect or reinfect as a result of either waning immunity or it's good at escaping immunity from past infection or vaccination, that it may find a larger pool of susceptible hosts. It also has the prospects of spreading around. The one thing I think is worth noting is since we've had this so-called Omicron soup, where we have these multiple variants sort of coexisting, coming and going and jockeying for position within each population, it's not really been about these really large individual waves anymore, like we had with the first Omicron or with the first BA2. It's much more about this sustained baseline and then sort of up and down around that. So I've said, it's not really tsunamis anymore. It's more the rising sea level and high and low tide. So I think the concern is less that this particular variant is likely to cause another massive global wave like, the original Omicron did. I don't think that's likely in my view, but it is surging in certain places that haven't had waves in some time. And it does stand to keep that baseline high in places that have had a sustained baseline for months now, without it really coming back down to the lows that we would like it to be.
Right. And let me ask Raj about, so we do know that this variant has originated from India, and I believe to say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's truly surging there. So would you be able to speak about the nature of how it is growing, and what's going on there in India, and how that might inform us about how it might perform in other places?
Absolutely. I would like to use the term it was first discovered, right, in India, or first identified in India, rather than, because good sequencing sites usually pick it up. That doesn't mean that, they are the first one to actually have it. In fact, for XBB.1.16, the first sequence was actually from New York. It might have been a traveler sequence, right? But we don't know exactly where that came from. But as Ryan said, if you look back at everything, it all started with BA.2. So, like after BA1, the BA2 background had multiple mutations, and you have BA2.75. And in fact, that's when the nickname variant started, like Centaurus variant. That's had a peak in India, not a big peak, but a big surge at the time, right? So all these recombinants are descendants of that particular BA.2.75. Why are we concerned? Because they're picking up more mutations. And when they pick mutations, we look at what are these mutations they are picking from, right? So these mutations make them more immune evasive and also like make them bind to ACE2 receptors tightly. So those are the two things that we are looking for. And that's why as Ryan Hisner, he originally spotted this from a group of initial variants that was sequenced and proposed from Maharashtra. He immediately spotted, hey, these mutations look like they will be immune evasive and they are likely to bind to ACE2 receptors. That's the reason why we have been monitoring. Now, all of a sudden, we have about 5,000 sequences, and mostly from India, but they are spread to about 38 different countries now. So that's the reason why we are concerned about this. And wherever you had a BA.2.75 or XBB wave, it may not cause a bigger wave, as Ryan said, like we're not talking about that, but the baseline is going to get higher and higher. That's what we are worried about. And already we are seeing XBB.1.16 is picking up more mutations.
Thank you, Sunil, for joining us. I understand that India has done a great job in the past keeping cases down. Could you tell us about how India's measures helped keep cases down?
If you look at India, India has been doing well primarily because of a few reasons. Given the fact that India has some inherent strengths, it's a largely rural population. Agriculture is the dominant occupation. People don't travel a lot. But beyond that point, I think it has been the decisive action, timely and decisive action that was taken by the government at that point in time, and probably the response that people had to that decisive action. So if you look at the earlier part of the pandemic, when we started out in March 2020, we started with a lockdown when the number of cases was very small. 500 was the number. And in the last part of the March, we started with a lockdown. But before the lockdown itself, the government was of the view that if we go for a lockdown, how will the people in general respond to it? So on and on, what we have seen over a period of time, for a large period of time, the people have responded in large measures to what government has been saying. Whether it was the guidelines with regard to travel, whether it was the guidelines with regard to lockdown itself, school closures, or to the vaccination itself, they have been largely followed. So there has not been a massive disconnect between what government said, what the leadership told, and what the people followed. So probably that has worked well as far as India is concerned. But if you ask me what two major factors would have been that would have tilted the balance in India being able to keep its cases low, I would say it has been decisive and quick action by the leadership and equally important response by the government. So maybe by the people. So maybe the communication has been the key as far as this action is concerned.
Can you tell us, though, what happened with the Delta outbreak?
Oh, yes, Delta was a traumatic experience. And to be very honest, Delta happened primarily because of two reasons. One was we became complacent. If you remember, in the later part of 2020, precisely in the month of September, the cases started going down. And the fact that cases started going down made people complacent. In addition to the fact, we were told that there is an arrival of a vaccine. Again, another factor which made people complacent. And on the other front, on the government front, what happened was that from a largely central government decided guidelines, as far as this pandemic was concerned, in the later part of 2020, the process of managing guidelines, managing pandemic shifted to the states. And as you know, all states are not born equal. So some of the states did not have the scientific acumen, did not have the decisiveness that was there with the central leadership. So that's where we made a mistake and we became complacent and thought that we had won over the pandemic, which was not a fact. And in the earlier part of March, when even we talked about the fact that we may be seeing a rise, we actually did see a rise, and Delta literally ravaged us, and we were not literally prepared for it. Again, if you ask me technically what went wrong at that point in time, in terms of the fact that we had not a very good genome sequencing system in place at that point in time, which came up in the later part of December, but it had not evolved to such an extent that we could pick up the new variants. So that's somewhere we made a mistake. But we did make some amends. Post Delta, we learned a lot of things. For example, the fact that the action had shifted to the states were able to make a huge contributions as far as the pandemic was concerned by devising local techniques, local systems, and local strategies to tackle the pandemic. For example, if you remember, there was this My Village Corona Free, which was being talked about in some parts of India, in Uttar Pradesh, for example, in Gujarat or in Maharashtra, wherein they ran schemes wherein one village could declare itself free of pandemic, free of corona, and the village will be rewarded with a sum of money to undertake developmental activities. So such things came up from the state itself. In addition to the fact that post-Delta, what we did was to extend the fact that people stayed home, they didn't need to venture out for work or to earn a livelihood. We extended the benefits of free rations to around 800 million people across the country. And you need to remember this fact that this scheme itself ran up to the earlier part of 2022 in some parts of the country. So we did learn our lessons from Delta, although Delta was something which hurt us badly and was primarily because of the fact that we had become complacent.
Thank you, Sunil. So could you tell us, after the Delta outbreak was managed, what happened after that?
As I said, Delta was traumatic. And what Delta did to Indian psyche or Indian common man was that it built in precautions. And post-Delta, what we see was that some amount of precautions were always followed by the Indian population. In addition to the fact that the messaging from the government continued to come in, it was never ever a time when messaging was at absolute zero. There was always some messaging that would go around on COVID and the fact that we needed to follow some precautions. We did see a few outbreaks as in the earlier part of 22 itself, or in the month of July in 22, but they were largely restricted and not evenly spread across the country. So if you look at these outbreaks, the southwest of India was largely the area wherein these outbreaks were felt, and the northern part and the northeastern part largely remained untouched during these outbreaks. We had a time when the entire Northeast was free of COVID for a longer period of time. So none of the cases, neither new cases or any active cases, were found in the entire Northeast. Uttar Pradesh was almost free of any cases of COVID. And you need to remember that Uttar Pradesh is as big as Brazil. Bihar was largely free of COVID. So adjoining parts of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh were free of COVID. So these large areas stayed free of COVID for a long period of time, primarily because of the fact that they continued to follow the precautions that got inbuilt into our psyche because of Delta, as also because of the fact that people continued to keep messaging on COVID. And as I said, the local population continued. For example, UP continued to give free food till the earlier part of 2022. So that concept got built into people that we are still in the pandemic. We have not moved up the pandemic, and precaution is the way to come out of the pandemic. So probably that might have helped us to keep the cases as low as we did have in the early part of January and February. So if you remember, in the earlier part of January, the number of cases went below 100. So that was almost as if we had eliminated this COVID-19. Unfortunately, we didn't. But most of the fact is that we were able to maintain the cases to a very low level.
Thank you, Sunil. So bring us to today. What is happening now with the public's behavior? What is happening now with cases?
I could see there's a dichotomy as far as messaging is concerned. So over maybe a last 2-3 months, there has been a diversity as far as messaging is concerned. If you look at the top leadership of the country, it continues to say that we are in the pandemic and we need to take care. We need to use precautions. But a group of experts has come up, which has been consistently talking of the fact that we are in a period of endemic. Infections may happen. Herd immunity is something which we have achieved through hybrid immunity of vaccines and getting infected. And this messaging itself has caused a type of confusion and has built in a bit of complacency among a common man. But if you look at what the government wants, or if you look at what the top leadership has been saying, it has been continuing to say that we need to have precautions, we need to use precautions, we are in the pandemic, we are not out of the pandemic, and the best way to tackle this pandemic is to use those precautions. So that continues to happen. And this is something that needs to go as a message to everybody across the country, that to fight this pandemic, the best way is to use precautions.
What is happening right now with the new XBB.1.16 variant?
A few things have happened together as far as India is concerned at this point in time. One is the arrival of the new variant, which is immune evasive, as you all know. So it has a capability of transmitting faster than other variants, which are in place in India. But second and more important thing probably is the fact that the vaccination which was received by Indians is tending to lose its immune effect. The fact is that most of us have received a second dose of vaccination as early as 10 to 12 months from now onwards. So that is something that is adding to the fact that there is a new variant. The fact is that the vaccination is not updated in a sense that we are tending to lose immunity because of the vaccines. And more importantly, again, is the fact that we are not up to date as far as precautions are concerned. The complacency that has come in because of the fact that the numbers are going down is one of the reasons that cases are going up. If you look at this way, once the numbers start falling down, people tend to think that they're out of the pandemic. And the fact that the numbers in India were at such a low level that people were literally assured of the fact that we are out of the pandemic. And added to this concept of that we are out of the pandemic was messaging that came from some of the experts who said that, look, we are out of the pandemic because we have achieved herd immunity, we have achieved hybrid immunity, so we don't need to worry now. You can go around, have fun, you don't need to use precautions. So primarily, that's where we are making a mistake. And now with the arrival of the new variant and the fact that we have waning immunity because of the vaccines itself and complacency on account of precautions, there's always a chance that we may see a surge of cases going up. And that's what is happening around. We are seeing a rise in the number of cases. And the worrying fact is, as I said previously as well, the worrying fact of the growing surge of cases is that it is more uniformly spread now than it was maybe earlier. So if we had the southwest of India reporting a few cases in January or the later parts of December, now we are seeing that there are cases coming from Delhi, there are cases coming from the northern parts adjoining Haryana, there are cases coming from Uttar Pradesh as well. So the fact that complacency is there, new variant is there, immunity is waning because of the vaccines, and messaging is again not up to the mark as it was throughout this pandemic. Direct, correct, and swift messaging is not there as it was there in the earlier parts of the pandemic. So maybe that's something that is building in and causing this surge.
Thank you. Also, this is a question for all. And I know we did speak about some of the concerns and consequences as the baseline of COVID infections is rising as these new variants emerge and take over the space. Are there other consequences of this new surge that are of concern, even acute symptoms or implications for long COVID? What can you say about that?
I would just say more infections is not a good thing in any dimension, and there's a number of reasons for that. So you mentioned one, which is the more people are infected, the more likely there will be additional long COVID cases, for example. It also means there will be that many more people with persistent long-term infections where very different variants can evolve within individual hosts. It means there will be more potential for co-infections with two different variants, which is how you get a recombinant like this in the first place. So just more infection means more evolution and more picking up of mutations of the ones that Raj described, and also the other mechanisms of evolution that can lead us to something pretty different, and potentially which is recombination or evolution within a host. Not to mention long COVID and just the sustained pressure on healthcare systems in places where the case rate has not been massively overwhelming in the way that it was with very large but sharp kind of peaks. It's just a constant number of people in hospital, which puts sustained pressure that it really can't be maintained long term.
We have about 1,200 Omicrons, right? So out of those, it's 927 of them are single lineages, and then we have about 250 recombinant lineages. If you keep calling everything as just Omicron, right, then that is a problem too. Because yesterday I had an interesting chat with a few physicians from around the world, in the sense that, like the conversation is about hey, like a bivalent vaccine in one country didn't work, but in one country seems to work well. But bivalent BA.1 is different than bivalent BA.5, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the reasons why, like even if you are using still Omicron, we need to kind of add that nuance, right? Saying Omicron BA.1, Omicron BA.5, or use nicknames like what Ryan's been championing around. It's been very good in communication in terms of global communication. If I say Kraken, people know exactly what I'm talking about. XBB.1.5, even though I would really like to have a lineage just named XBB.1.16, because that makes, as a scientist, that is more scientific. But still, sometimes nicknames do work. And especially in communications, when you have thousands of variants going around. The other thing I would also say is surveillance is absolutely important. I would encourage people, that are testing, please get PCR tested so that those are, at least some part of those will go into genomic sequencing. I would like to thank all the sequencers in Maharashtra, Gujarat, Haryana, and other parts of India who are sequencing and rapidly submitting. You can sequence and not submit sequence for 3 months, 4 months. That doesn't help, right? And they have been rapidly submitting. And databases like GSAID, I would thank them because recently there is a lot going on. I don't want to get into politics, but GSAID has been of tremendous help to variant trackers like myself, Ryan, and like everybody else that I've been working with. And many of us, work on this during our spare time, right? This is not our primary job, but we are really interested in making the world a safer place and also to look for our children, right? And we thank, like people like Sunil on the front lines because they are informing us of these new symptoms. And, we have like people like Dr. Karyakarte from Maharashtra giving sequences. So we knew about all these things, put things together and then inform people so that, like Ryan can help us with communication. So thank you, WHN, for, letting us, inviting in this forum to tell that to everybody. So I would like to thank these people at the forefront.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate that. And
I'll say one thing too. I was gonna say how important surveillance remains, including both in particular countries and at airports and wastewater and all sort of anywhere we can get the information. And I'll echo the very sincere thank you to those who have been doing this, both providing the sequences, sharing the sequences, and combing through the sequences for so long. It's been really important. And so XBB.1.16, we nicknamed it, I think, more than a month ago. So, the early signs were there very quickly, thanks to that data sharing and the hard work of people, combing through those sequences and identifying important mutations and so on. So that's the one I was going to echo that. But the other thing I would say is, the level of baseline infection that we see is not normal for, we do have seasonal colds, we have seasonal flu. We're used to the idea of, you get sick now and then, but this notion of potentially getting something like COVID maybe twice a year, 3 times a year, we are not used to that, in fact. And so for real flu, it's, once a decade for most adults, I think. And so this idea that it's fading into the background and it's just going to circulate at the level that it's at, and the number of reinfections that are occurring is going to be the new normal. That's something very different for us. And we're not, I think, taking that quite seriously enough. In particular, depending on where you are, but where I am, hospitals are dropping protective measures. They're dropping mask requirements within hospitals. And so that sort of was the last line where there were still mandates in place to protect the most vulnerable. And I think when you see these kinds of high baselines, these potential surges, this moving around of variants that might be more capable of reinfecting and so on, it's a reminder that at the bare minimum, we ought to be keeping hospitals and long-term care facilities and other healthcare facilities safe. So the pandemic is not over. I think Sunil made that point. It's different, but it's not over, and we need to remain vigilant, both in terms of the data and in our actions to prevent the evolution of more variants.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. We couldn't agree more. And World Health Network appreciates everyone's time here. And as you said, all of the folks that are contributing to keeping these numbers up to date so we can stay informed and make the best decisions. Thanks for joining us today. Please check out the links attached to the broadcast for more information and helpful resources. visit our website at whn.global. If you'd like to connect with like-minded people across the world and local in your community, please join covidmeetups.com. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. We look forward to seeing you soon. Stay safe.